Just a quick video today to go through the 15-point peace plan that supposedly President Trump and Iran agreed upon. So anyway, moving on to the first point, the removal of all sanctions on Iran. This is, of course, the sugar in the coffee or the icing on the cake. Not too sure exactly why this is point number 1. Actually, this should be point number 15. If you have 15 points, you would remove all sanctions at the end. But apparently, we're starting from the icing and not the cake. So the first thing to know about this plan is that there was a removal of some sanctions on Iran after the JCPOA was signed, which was an agreement signed between Iran and the United States under President Obama, and that was working fine. So there was a removal of some sanctions, and they had a pretty good agreement. Later came President Trump and basically took all of that and that fragile piece of glass and took a sledgehammer to it. So the Iranians, first of all, wouldn't be believing anything about any removal of sanctions. And if they removed it, it would just be for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever. It would just be enough to get what they want, and then they would immediately apply all sanctions, reapply all sanctions. So the Iranians would never believe that coming from President Trump, especially since they had a good thing going under the President Obama's JCPOA, and there was inspections, there was everything that Iran could have expected, wanted, so to speak, to normalize relations, and President Trump destroyed all that. So anyway, moving on to point number 2, U.S. assistance in advancing and developing a civilian nuclear project, electricity generation. So there, under President Trump's agreement, any nuclear enrichment in Iran would be removed, and then enriched uranium would be brought in from other countries to the nuclear power stations as needed, supposedly. Of course, this is ridiculous, because if Iran is depending on nuclear energy and is depending on the United States to bring in uranium, enriched uranium for the nuclear power plants, then you have this situation where they could use that at any time as a bargaining chip for changing the government, removing a preferred export partner, anything. So again, Iran would never accept this because they would leave themselves open to blackmail and extortion from the United States. Third point, removal of the threat of sanctions being reimposed. So again, this is just basically, this whole sanctions game is a carrot on a stick, and they'll just keep that in front of Iran. It'll never be realized. It's just a mechanism for manipulation. So again, Iran, why would they believe anything coming from President Trump? Point 4, Iran's nuclear program is frozen under a defined framework. So basically, this would be the dismantling of any nuclear program, and that is if Iran were to completely submit to the United States. 5, the enriched uranium to remain, but under supervision and agreed limits. So this would basically, so the United States would basically create a NATO or U.S. allied bases, military bases in Iran, where they would manage all the uranium. It would be kind of like Fort Knox, but instead of gold, it would be for uranium. And it would all be controlled, supervised, and at the slightest bit of any rebellion from the Iranians, they would remove it all and then extort and manipulate Iran into accepting whatever conditions. So again, Iran would never accept that. Number 6, the missile program to be addressed at a later stage with limits on quantity and range. So this is the ballistic missile program, and of course this is the heart of the Iranian defense. If they were not able to have their ballistic missiles, they would basically be a sitting duck for any future attacks. Again, why would Iran accept that? And we have President Trump saying that this is basically the conditions that they were working on and agreeing on, blah, blah, blah. We all know that this is all made up, but again, it's important to look at the specific conditions that the United States wanted to put on Iran and why this is so ridiculous. So, 7, use of nuclear programs restricted to civilian defensive purposes only. Well, again, the U.S. would basically take over their nuclear program, and the Iranians would only be allowed to work as seen fit. The United States would run most of it, and the Iranians would be the water boy for the superstars, for the heroes. And so again, there's no, this is obviously nothing to do with an Iranian-run nuclear program. And why would Iran need any help from the United States or any restrictions? Of course, this would be the end of Iran to, they could do anything to their energy program if Iran gave the United States full access to their countrywide energy source for their industries and for their cities. I mean, it would just basically be, putting yourself in Sicily under a mafia boss. Why would anyone do that? So again, there's no sense to this point. It's obviously fake. Development of existing nuclear capabilities halted. Well, I mean, that's more than obvious. If the United States comes in, they would shut down any nuclear capability. But Iran was not engaging in creating a nuclear weapon, so this is the dismantling of their nuclear energy. So in the end, this is the dismantling, and then I guess Iran could go to coal or some dirty energy source that would contaminate its cities and create all kinds of environmental risks. 9, no further expansion of enrichment capabilities. You could have summarized all these points in one. No further expansion of enrichment capabilities. So, if Iran were to put itself under the United States, they would remove all the centrifuges, they would remove all the enrichment centers, they would probably imprison all the nuclear scientists, blah, 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 or just make them disappear in the dark of night to some CIA black site. So this is, again, ridiculous. I'm just rehashing the point which the United States is trying to make about Iran. Number 10, no production of weapons-grade nuclear material on Iranian soil. So technically speaking, Iran, with the nuclear material that it has, could create 10 to 15 nuclear bombs. But what would that do against what we know? Israel to have at least 200 bombs. That's what Colin Powell said in the year 2000. And they have their own nuclear enrichment program. They probably have a huge arsenal. And so have 10. The size of the weapon would probably be something like the little boy um, from that was used in Japan. I think it's called the little boy. So anyway, I'll correct that in the description if I find that's wrong. Sorry if any mistake. But basically, Iran could create some nuclear weapons, but they would be of very little use, and the delivery would be very difficult. And so, that is. But the whole presupposition here is that Iran was working on creating nuclear weapons, which they never were. There was a fatwa that was put out by the Ayatollah, and he was holding firm on that point, despite the 12-day war, and seeing that that was just round one, kind of a warm up. He still didn't approve the country to start working on nuclear weapons. So, that the whole presupposition that Iran was diligently working on nuclear weapons is completely fictitious. 11. All enriched material to be handed over to the IAEA with an agreed timeline. The IAEA is probably never going to step foot on Iran again. They won't put themselves under any future inspections regime now that the United States has clearly shown that its intention was always to destroy Iran. But the IAEA has been a part of this whole creation of a narrative. The leader of the IAEA from Argentina, he apparently was involved in passing secret information to Israel about the location, identities of the nuclear scientists who were later eliminated, and how did they know who were the nuclear scientists if all this is under a lot of secrecy in Iran? Of course, it was through the IAEA. So anyway, why would they ever allow them to step foot back in Iran again? That would be extremely hard to believe. Number 12, Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo to be taken out of use, destroyed. So basically, this is supposedly all about nuclear weapons, but these were part of their civilian nuclear energy program, which is, of course, allowed by under international law. So Iran would not willingly give up its right to peaceful nuclear enrichment. 13, international monitoring and verification mechanisms enforced. So I guess the question is, whether Iran really wants to be, under a microscope. It wants to be in a cage. It wants to be in a prison where every movement is watched over by satellites and by drones. So who knows what they would have planned, but certainly they have companies that have that produce weapons that are managed by AI alone, and they could kill anyone at any time in any location. And apparently, because it has good reason to do that, of course, that's all goes through an AI algorithm. So why would Iran put itself under this? And of course, they know what the Western countries did to Iraq with all the monitoring and verification. There was the no-fly zone, outside the no-fly zone in Iraq. If Iraq was to start building any kind of governmental building, as soon as they got one brick on top of another, it was blown up. There was an incredible number of airstrikes in Iraq during the time of in between the two Gulf Wars. And so this is basically what we'd be looking at in Iran, kind of a no-fly zone outside of this zone. there would be Iran would basically have to go through high water to get any kind of infrastructure approved. This also, they would still be under some sort of sanctions regime and embargo, leading to the collapse of the country economically. So again, they've seen all that in Iraq. Why would they ever agree to do that in their own country? 14, gradual implementation tied to compliance. So basically, this is the salami slicing, where every day there would be a new condition added, and if the Iranians weren't willing to go along with these increasingly ridiculous conditions that would be placed on their daily lives, then we would start getting airstrikes and assassinations and kangaroo courts, black sites where people would disappear into a hole, never to be seen again. So again, why would Iran ever agree to that? And finally, we have the 15th point, additional regional security understandings between the parties. So I read this as the Gulf states especially would have access to the resources of Iran, and they could exploit them however they wish. Iran would not have any ability to stop that. And of course, this would be the sacking of Iran, kind of its resources, of all that it has, turning its population into slave labor. And of course, the Gulf states are tools of the United States, and they would all work together to make sure that Iran would never come back again. They would probably also divide Iran into different provinces, and a Gulf state taking control of each one. Probably would remove from Iran its access to the Strait of Hormuz or the Persian Gulf. So, within all these very generic statements, you can read in and see exactly what it is that the United States was planning. And of course, these 15 points were never going to be accepted. This is just more of the same. But more than anything else, these were just time-killing efforts by the United States to manipulate the energy market and to try to give the impression to Western media, which hardly ever questions the actual narrative, that we're close to a peace deal, that peace efforts are being made. This document with the 15 points is not an effort towards peace. This is an effort toward total capitulation from Iran, which they will never do. They said they will not do. They've been preparing for this day for 20 years. They're saying, bring it on. We're waiting for you. Please come. What else do they have to say? So anyway, they know that they need to get through this period, this kind of dark period where they're being bombed, attacked on every level, whether in the media, whether the militarily, whether by previous neighbors, current neighbors, previous friends, and whoever it is. Iran may feel alone, but they know they need to get through this pain, and there will be a long-term gain for Iran. The United States will, of course, have to accept defeat, go home, and I don't know what will happen with the U.S. bases in the Gulf states. If they are removed, then what's going to happen to the Gulf states monarchies? What will happen to them? That may collapse because these are minority governments. These are petro monarchs. They really only care about money and about their wealth. So we will see what happens once this conflict is really starting to conclude and what things look like. But this 15-point plan was just thrown out there. I even think that it was delivered by hand to Pakistan. Imagine, why not just fax it? Why not have a Zoom meeting and share the document with somebody from Pakistan? Say, here are the 15 points. Why fly over? Well, it's to create the narrative that there's this effort underway to bring about a peace deal. So anyway, I'll conclude this video here. Thanks for joining me. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you back for future videos here on the Rowell Report. Take care. Bye-bye.